I'm going to start by introducing you to my friend Ulde, who is, he's a hammer man. He lives in Southwest Ethiopia in the Omo Valley. And I took this picture of him singing about his favorite ox. And I just really wanted to use this to kind of welcome you to the presentation. He's using his hands to show how he's trained the horns of his ox, his favorite ox. And this is, you know, I'm not a person who has an ox. I'm not a person who can sing, but I do also have this, like the same as the way a hammerman loves his ox. I absolutely love visual storytelling. And I just can't, I'm really looking forward to sharing what we have today. And as Nicola said, I'm really hoping that you'll join in, and that if you have any questions, you'll drop those in the chat and we can stop if we need to and answer those. So today it's just a little heads up about what's coming. We're going to talk about visual storytelling in a development context. As mentioned, we're going to talk the for whom, the why, and then I'm going to, you know, as a visual storyteller, I think what we'll learn is that the most important piece of visual storytelling, the most important thing about visual storytelling is its ability to help people remember things and to reach them. And so on that note, I am going to share my own story. And then we'll talk about some tips for visual storytelling and go into greater depth with a section where you guys can just answer, or we can ask any questions. Because very much today, my goal is to not only share my experience, but to hear yours and to make sure that if you have questions, I am able to hopefully answer them, or somebody else, because there's lots of, I mean, I saw some of the names of the people who are here, and there are a lot of people here who also can answer those questions if I can't. So let's just start on what is visual storytelling. And I thought perhaps, I mean, I think visual storytelling, the simplest definition that I would give is it's the art of communicating a narrative or a message through the use of visual media, such as photos, videos. But there are a lot of other tools that we can use for visual storytelling. And I wanted to just kind of get you guys involved from the very beginning. Would you drop into the chat perhaps some of the other tools that you might be able to use, what you might think is other tools you could use for visual storytelling? And we'll just wait for a couple of seconds while people are there dropping them, hopefully. Okay, Miles is saying meaningful objects. Absolutely. Absolutely. Maps and diagrams, great. Infographics. Happy to have any more that anybody wants to throw in there. Theater. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, illustrations, cartoons. Tanvir said, that and that Miles, between Miles and Tanvir, they're talking about illustrations, cartoons, and theater. I think one other thing that Tanvir and I have worked together for 35 years or something, and he happens to be one of the best visual storytellers I know, and could give this presentation in a heartbeat as well. So, but Tanvir is he did an event that I went to in Bangladesh last year for the kickoff event for a USAID project. And that was also, I mean, that was a form of storytelling. He was the one who really explained to me an event can be like storytelling. So yes, absolutely. An event, theater, all different kinds of stuff. So I also threw up a few other came up with a few other ideas. So of course we have photos and videos, data visualization, animation, illustration, graphics, the way you lay out a book, the way you lay out a flyer, the way you put something together also says a lot about who you are as an organization, what you do, logos and branding and the different fonts, of course. And then I would also offer that it doesn't have to. I think we always talk about pictures and visuals as being worth 1,000 words, but in fact, I think sometimes you really need the 1,000 words. There are many cases where it's essential for you to actually have the story as well. So moving on, for whom? And again, I'm going to ask you guys to, I mean, some of you are visual storytellers or communicators out there, communications officers. For whom? Who do you want to reach with visual storytelling? And what do you hope to achieve by using it? And again, maybe just drop a few things in the chat. Lana says, using visual tools and media to convey a narrative. Exactly. And that is very much visual storytelling. So who, given that this is development, really skewed towards development, who do we want to talk to? And why? So Miles says opinion leaders, policymakers, grant givers, peer organizations, supporters, clients, and the general public. Exactly. Anybody else has got one? I'll wait a couple of seconds here. And Nishta says, to let my audience understand my brand through my website. Exactly. Miles also said partner organizations. Yes.
Lee, there was also a comment from Obaidul about funding agency.
Oh, I didn't see that. So yes, Tanvir, of funding agencies, government agencies, and mass people. Exactly. Okay. So I'm going to keep it moving. So yeah, I mean, I think we've probably covered all of these: donors, potential donors. For reporting, I know USAID, for example, has reporting requirements that people have to do success stories every, quarter, whatever it is. Fundraising, development partners, and where they can be used to raise awareness, share experience. Advocacy is another thing, the general public, and then internal audiences as well. Somebody I knew at USAID said to me at one point, actually, we do a lot of talking to ourselves. It's true, in my experience. So I asked people, because I didn't feel like I could quite assume what the impact of my work had been. So I decided to chat with some of my clients in preparation for this webinar. And I asked them, so what is the impact of my work? What has been the impact of my work? And these were the answers they gave. And I think in some of these cases, you'll see some of this as we go along when I'm talking about some of the publications. But positioning people as leaders in the sector, showcasing new approaches, fundraising, new contracts, raising the profile of our technical brand. And then I know at least one story was used to advocate with Congress for continued funding, in fact, for family planning programs. So we'll see more of these things as we go along. So why visual storytelling? As I mentioned, I mean, it's memorable. Visuals are more memorable than text alone. And I thought this statistic was pretty amazing, that most people remember only 10% of what they read after 3 days. And I thought, Yeah, that's probably about where I am. But if you add images, it jumps to 65%. It's more engaging and emotional. There is another statistic that I don't have here, but it was that over 20% increased retention of emotion of a message if you have it wrapped, of a fact if you have it wrapped in a story. So visuals can also be understood and appreciated by people of all languages and backgrounds. It doesn't mean that everybody understands the visuals the same exact way, though. I would definitely make that caveat. Okay, but this is perhaps my favorite thing, is that story is kind of the world's first virtual reality. We get to step inside somebody else's world. I mean, actually, I was going to say one more thing here, is that this was a refugee camp in South Sudan. And I was there doing a story about the girl in the center who's in the orange shirt and her sister who has the bucket on her head. And I mean, it was a situation I never could have imagined. I have read a lot about, well, what does it take to get water to a refugee camp? And what is it like to collect water? What is it like to live there? And in going, then I get to, I mean, I'm able to live and to see it, but how can I convey that to someone else? I have, photos are really the best way. I mean, you might do video as well, but we'll talk about that. There's a whole other thing, but it's just that this idea of transporting your viewer to places they could never imagine, and giving people a window into their world. So the risk of boring everyone by reading this, I'm going to just do it anyway. Development is about people. Most of our audiences lack connection with or an understanding of the people that we work with and the context in which we work. Our job as storytellers is to provide them with a window into that world, take them into somebody else's life so they can see the world through somebody else's eyes. And in light of that, in spirit of what I'm talking about in terms of retention and storytelling, I'm going to, as I mentioned, I'm going to tell you my story, which really started when I moved to Bangladesh. That was a long time ago in 1995. And Tanvir and I, Tanvir, who is, I've mentioned several times as being on this webinar, being here, is he and I together ended up through a series of happy accidents doing a book called Postcards from Bangladesh. We're talking pre-digital, so I don't actually have any other way to show you than by, just taking some snapshots of it. I was at the time a designer, illustrator, and art director for a magazine, and Tanvir was a photographer. And we worked with another guy who you see here, Shudip Sen, who is also a writer. And so in making this book, I think it really sparked this first love for making books, and also this first love for developing countries, because, and particularly for Bangladesh, which has a huge place in my heart. And I go back every chance I can. It just afforded it was a new window. It was exactly what I'm talking about with all of this. It was a window into this world. And in fact, it was the only place in the world, ironically, that I said I would never, ever go to. And it was because I had seen so many, I mean, this was even back in the 90s, that whole idea of the international basket case and the idea that Bangladesh was struggling and it was, nothing, and it was difficult and it was horrific and poverty was everywhere. And I had all these images myself from the few things that I had seen. And going there, it was, I mean, initially overwhelming and amazing, chaotic, but it was through working with Tanvir that I got to see a different side of the country. And in this book, that was really our objective, was to show that other side of the country, to show the country in a different light. And so we could go so far as to say kind of to rebrand the country. It gave me, Tanvir was able to give me a window into this other world. And I was able to see the country through his eyes. And he became kind of a cultural translator for me. And he'd never even been to the US, but he was able to explain Bangladesh to me in a way that I could understand. And I was able to see that even these, the most ordinary stories of a woman who lived in the slum, which you're seeing there, and then also this man who set himself up as a dentist with bicycle spokes, and in a local market, was, these were interesting, these were amazing stories. The one that was the most amazing was, for me, and the most transformative, was doing this section on river songs here, where we actually sat there together and worked on translating the feeling that came through these songs. And it was such a window into this whole other way of seeing the world. So that is really what inspired me to get going in all of this. And it still really inspires my thinking. So let me carry on. So that was a kind of after we finished, we published that in 2002. And it is still available in Bangladesh only, unfortunately. But I was able to, I was so taken with this idea of making a book, and taken with this idea of what could be conveyed through talking to people and capturing their stories. I mean, what we tried to do was capture a lot of stories in people's own words. So I wanted to take that further. And so Tanvir had enough. I mean, I think he had other projects in mind, and I just set off with I hired a translator to supplement get it good enough to direct a taxi and order dinner Bangla. And we went with my driver, and we would go off for a couple of weeks at a time. And it was my 10,000 hours. They say it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in something. And I clocked a lot of hours in the field researching. I was reading everything I could get my hands on, plus doing this kind of writing and photography and interviewing and just really trying to understand the country, what I was doing, how to write a story, how to make it interesting. And Tanvir kept asking me the predictable question, perhaps, so what? I would come back with something, I would say, oh my God, this is great. And he would look at me and say, so what? It's actually a great question, because it really forced me to hone in on my vision and figure out what actually matters and what is just fluff. Because I think coming in, particularly as an outsider, everything can look like, oh my God, that's amazing. So some more pictures from that book. One of the other big things I learned was how much information is too much information. I ended up with way too much information, and it was hard to figure out what to leave out. Again, just some of the more ordinary things that to a Bangladeshi eye might also look like nothing. You know, all the stone collectors in the river. Bangladesh has no stones. It's actually a fascinating story. But maybe to somebody who lives there, it's not so fascinating. But so it's kind of the outsider perspective has its pros and its cons. So then, unfortunately, we moved before that book was finished, and then life kind of took over, and it didn't get finished. But everything that I did there, and everything that has transpired over the next 20 years, that was the foundation for it. In 2004, we moved from Bangladesh to Ethiopia. And there, a kind of a chance encounter led to an opportunity to do a book for Save the Children. And I was working with a journalist. I'd been doing some photographs for her, and we decided she had this opportunity, and she said, well, they asked me to write a report, but we could do something better than that. And we'd seen so many, I think both of us had seen so many development publications over the year, that publications that kind of were just a jumble of words full of jargon, pictures where people were stretched so that they looked like aliens. You know, it's kind of like people didn't know how to resize the photos properly. So there were poor quality photos, really boring. And I just thought, you know, who even wants to, no offense to anybody who's making these things, but it's like, who wants to read this? It's just going to go into the trash after any event or after anybody picks it up. So why don't we take what I was doing before, thinking about how can we tell an interesting story? How can we take great photos? How can we do design that works and make something that people want to look at? Extract the jargon and make a coffee table book for development. So what we did with these books was try to, this is like the front section and the back section. So we developed this kind of formula wherein we would take the jargony parts, especially, and put it in the about the project. The jargon, the statistics, all of that stuff that really interrupt the reading and the flow of the story, and put it there because some people want it, and so it's there for them, but some people don't. So, and then at the beginning, there is a kind of, in this case, it was essential with harmful traditional practices. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with these, but like in Ethiopia, just going back a slide, these tools are, this one here, if you can see my cursor, is a uvula cutter. So it's when kids had a sore throat, and it would be used. This was a used one that it was not sitting around rusting. It just looked like that. You would stick that into somebody's throat, the kid's throat, and just yank out the uvula. Extract teeth with this one here. The pliers, the scratch out tonsils with this one here. FGM, you've got, of course, these razor blades and things, but it's the idea of this was like, how do we, it would be very easy for people to think that these people were monsters, like, how could you do this to your children? And so it was essential in this case to really set it up so that the book was actually called For Their Own Good. And And we started the book with this idea of people taking their children, people in Western countries taking their children for vaccinations. And the idea that the kids don't like it, and it's painful, but of course we know that it's for their own good. And the people who are doing this are thinking the exact same thing. Now, of course, we have different information, and we do know when things are actually good and when things are not, but seriously, over thousands of years, these people have come to believe that this was, extracting a child's milk teeth would stop them from having diarrhea. Or extracting a uvula, scratching out the tonsils would stop the sore throats. So we really try to step into that world and then do that kind of cultural communication thing, be a bridge between what's going on here and what's going on in, so that we can speak to somebody in Peoria or, even Washington, D.C., and explain that this is not just crazy stuff. So again, then all these elements came together into this thing that I kind of dubbed coffee table books for development, that had good photos, attractive design, they were easy to read, variety of content, different ways to address and take care of the stories and present the stories. And then the idea was that they would be something you could dip into. My main idea was that if people were attracted to the book, they would pick it up and they would look at it, and maybe they would read a little bit of it, and then they would see that it was quite interesting, and then they'd see more nice photos and other different interesting ways of presenting the story and different pacing, and they might read a little bit more, and pretty soon something would actually be communicated. So that was really my idea. And if that book was kept out because it was attractive, it was kept on a coffee table instead of on a shelf or in a trash can, then it had a chance of making an impact. And so this actually, one of the stories that I'm kind of most happy about in terms of one of these books that I did about pastoralists in Ethiopia was that one of my clients did actually have the book sitting out on his on the table in his office, and a man from the government who he had a meeting with came and was there to was there and ended up, he came a few minutes early and ended up looking at the book because it was sitting there. He started looking at the book, and my client said he kind of watched him out of the corner of his eye from his office while he was having this other meeting. He said, and I watched, and he dipped into the book. He opened it a little bit, flipped around, and then he started reading. He said, and then he read some more, and then he read some more and more. He said, and by the time we had our meeting 20 minutes later, he had read the whole book pretty much. And he said, and then when we had our conversation, it started on a whole different note. It started from a position of, many of the Ethiopian, at that point, the Ethiopian government officials were agriculture was their background. And the idea was, why don't these pastoralists settle down and be more like agriculturalists? That's a much better way. And the book had given him a little bit of insight into, this is not a way of life that is just let's be stupid and follow some animals. It is a very sensible adaptation for where these people live. So that for me was a huge success. So then in 2008, we left Ethiopia. I got divorced, and it was like, I've got to develop this thing into a business like pronto. So I ended up, I mean, it feels like a miracle, but some work came in, and in fact, from that same client, I ended up doing another book. This one was for Save the Children, and the idea again, very much to communicate the value of a pastoralist way of life. So I'm going to just show you that. So here we are the School of Life. It's we'll talk about the design as we go along. So I decided, I mean, we one of the challenges was logistics and finding this story. And we happened to know a man that had, I happened to know him. I'd met him many times on other trips to that region. So that's the man there sitting with his children around the fire. And so we asked him if we could do a story about him and his community. And what we wanted to focus on was how children, how people learn pastoralism, and in that way also teach people about pastoralism. So we have the scrapbook effect that we did. I wanted to really highlight this idea because it was there was one of the boys in the community. This is a book about education, and he had actually had just 8 years of education, and he came back to his community, and he wanted to. He told me when we were interviewing him that he was making a journal about his experiences as a pastoralist, and he wanted to share this with his kids when they got older. So I wanted to take that idea. Now, of course, I never saw his journal, but I decided that if he had a journal, and if I could have drawn his journal, this might be what it looked like, interspersed with these kind of other, telling the story about what a pastoralist learns through life, which seemed to me kind of crazy at the moment. But every person I asked, I kept thinking they're just telling me this. That there's like a definite way of life, that you learn this and then you learn this. And I said, that's ridiculous. And asked again and again. And in fact, everybody said, oh yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's exactly what we do. So, so I asked them to help me with drawings. The kids were doing the drawings for me. And we made this book that is really about trying to explain what you're learning. And so these were the pages, again, kind of, these are aimed, really a lot of these are aimed at government officials, but it's and other organizations. But it's like, talking about the fact that your male camel is like a Toyota Land Cruiser. These are their words. It can bring grain from the market and carry an entire house on its back. I mean, so people talking to us, we wanted to just share their voices, share their life and how they live their life. And what does it mean to be a pastoralist? Talk about why movement is essential, share some songs and the way they play games, this with camel dung. And document the games. This one, how to cheat a camel. So the camel's baby had died and they got another mother to look after. They got her to, the camel whose baby had died, they got her to look after another baby whose mother had died. So I won't go through more of this. All this stuff is on my website. And you guys can take a look. Let me get back to where we are in the presentation. So basically the idea was taking it further and continuing to take it further. So here's another story. And And this one, it was for UNICEF. And I did probably 16 different countries. I did books for small books for them that they used and leveraged to get funding. Specifically, these were, it was for private fundraising partnerships, UNICEF. So they would take the assets, they would take the booklet, but they would also take the assets and use them to do galas and I would get notices every once in a while. Oh, we've got money because we did this gala, or we did this thing, or we did that other event. So the books, again, taking a similar approach, it's just, here are the facts at the top, the location on the map, and then we meet the family. This book was kind of unique, and I decided to share this one instead of one of the other ones, because it was, we actually stayed on site. That has happened several times working with UNICEF, but living in the village with people allowed us to be there at all, pretty much the whole day. We could, well, the entire day and the night. So it gave a totally different kind of photography than what you get when you just have to do the kind of development flyby, which does not yield great results most of the time. So this was the family, the mother, who had lost her husband. And this is, I wanted to pause here for a moment because it really talks about, this was not my idea for what her photo should be. I actually took another photo where she might not have been smiling, but she didn't look quite so miserable. As a rule, I don't take those kind of like poor me photographs. No, I don't take them. And so actually I took the other photograph and I showed her and I said, so look, I've taken this photo of you. It looks so nice. What do you think? And she said, no, that's not the right photo. And I said, well, you show me what the photo should be. And she said, this one, this is the one. Take it like this. This is how I feel most days. And trying to being a mother, a disabled mother in Nepal with 4 children, trying to raise them was obviously a lot. So it just takes you through kind of a day in the life. We tried to bring, I tried to bring, the time that all these things are going on. And then we also brought in, because we need to know, well, what is UNICEF actually doing? So instead of throwing all that at the back, in this case, we put it in to these little boxes. So it was accessible, but without, cluttering up their words. And again, all of these are their words. So, and again, that can be, you can take a look at also on the website if you want to see more. But so, and then I'm gonna just, this one, the only thing I'm going to show you is one page because I don't want to lose time. And this was just it was just something different graphically. Using this is the table of contents page, just to kind of show people where are we and which story is where it is. So let's see then. Okay, going, so then we're going to jump way far ahead to a couple of videos. This video, I like this video, fine, but I won't say it's the be all and end all, but it was all shot on an iPhone. And I think it is a very good example of why video. I mean, a place where only video could work, because it's a journey. So I could not have done a book. Here we go. This I did this one last year. So. Come on. Okay. Before I go on, I wanted to...
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, a massive belt of seaweed in the Atlantic Ocean threatens the beaches of the United States, Mexico, and Caribbean. Then a new allegation that Ronald Reagan's 1980 campaign worked to sabotage President Jimmy Carter's election year efforts to free the...
Thank you. So sorry about that. I'm going to go back to the presentation now. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to go back to the chat. Barbara Phillips said, static images allow us to slow down and reflect. Dynamic images do something different, I think. And she's absolutely right. I totally agree. There's always so much more to the story than a single image. It's great to get some insights into the backstory. I'm glad. So, all right. And then just the next, we'll go to the next video. And this one is a teaser for a longer video. We tried something really different, a 9-minute video, and everybody was like, social media cannot handle this. It will break the social media. I mean, anyway, we tried it. I think it worked all right. So it's there. It's on my website. You can also find it on USAID Bangladesh's YouTube channel. And I'm not showing it there because it is we're definitely going to get. Okay. So this is just the short teaser version is just a minute.
Six decades ago, USAID joined an international coalition of development partners in Bangladesh. Their mission? To save the lives of the 5 million children worldwide who were dying every year due to cholera and other diarrheal diseases. Today, the whole world benefits from this simple solution. ORS has saved more than 70 million lives over the past 50 years and helped more children in Bangladesh and around the world live to see their 5th birthday than ever before. How did the country at the epicenter of the world's cholera nightmare come to lead the world in vanquishing diarrhea? And what can we learn from its success?
Okay, and I'm going to close out of there so we don't have the same problem. All right. So, and I want to do a big shout out to Hafiz Ullah, who is also here in the webinar, who is the fabulous editor that I worked with. Together, we really, I mean, it was a real collaboration. So both of those videos, Hafiz is responsible for at least 50% of the amazingness of any editing that's gone on there. And there's a lot of editing. So thank you, Hafiz. So then finally, I think just let's do some wrap up with a few tips. I don't see any questions or anything in the chat. If anybody has anything, feel free to throw it in there and I'll keep an eye on that. So just a few tips for better visual storytelling, because a lot of people said that when we were doing this, they said, oh, well, yes, in the poll, that's what we want to see. So here we go. All right, first tip. What are you making? Who is your target audience? And I would argue that I think often, particularly with social media, we think of it as a, this huge, oh, I've got to do an audience, like I would ask at USAID, well, who's your audience? And they'd be like, oh, like everybody. And you can't speak to everybody very well because, well, it's obvious. You cannot speak to everyone very well, but sometimes your audience is an audience of one. Oh, we want to speak to Samantha Power. We want to speak to, ultimately we want to speak to Atul Gawande, who's in charge of global health there. So maybe that is like think about your audience. Then think about, what do you want to communicate to them? Where do you want to communicate with them? At an event, at a conference, online? And what do you want the product to achieve? So awareness raising, fundraising, and what is your budget? Sometimes those things are very much at odds. Okay. So then, assuming we've made a choice and we're going to do a project, before you go to the field, research, story and character selection. I am of two minds about this, whether I've applied for a couple of we've responded for a couple of proposals recently, and they want to know, well, who are you going to, what are you going to ask? Who are you going to ask it to? What are you going to do before you even get there? And honestly, sometimes that works. Sometimes it really doesn't work. I tend to think of it as at best, it's a prompt. You need to see what's going on the ground and pivot. Be ready to respond to that. In line with that, who is going to the field with you? I think that's for me, my preference. No offense to the communications people out there, but unless they know a lot about this project, I want to go with a project person. I don't want a general communications person. That person can be useful in terms of helping me with branding or with certain other things. But by and large, for me, the key is, does this person know about the project? So I see there's 3 questions in the chat. Let me see, or 3 things in the chat. Let's see. Yep. Should you always ask people's permission to take a photograph of them? If not, what are the circumstances when you don't need to ask permission? And anybody else who faces this, please feel free to chip in. I think, technically speaking, you are, when I'm at a rally, when I'm at, you're out and about in the public sphere, generally as a journalist, you are able to take people's pictures. I think I don't do that personally with children, because I think there's a lot more to be worried about with that. And in many cases, I feel like, certainly like with this photograph, you know, I held up the camera, like, is it okay? I'm just driving by, you're there, I stopped the car. Can I take your photo? I just held it up and she smiled like that and I took her picture. So, okay, so that's, thank you, Barbara. And we can chat more about other questions. Let's see. Word for word translation. I think in terms of storytelling, effective storytelling, a lot of times I go to the field and people are giving you a kind, I mean, people will listen. I was in a place doing a story. I was in Bangladesh doing a story about TB. And I had some people who basically, I asked a question. Fortunately, I can understand enough Bangla to be able to say, that was not my question, or to listen to his answer and to say, he's just said basically this. I can't give the whole specifics, but when they gave me the summary translation, it bore no resemblance to the man's words. And it showed that in essence, what was happening was, we here have this idea about who this guy is and his status in this whole situation. And it's a lower status. And he's just complaining, or he's got all these details that just don't matter. So we're just going to tell you what we think you need to know. And that is exactly what I do not want to know. I want to know what that man is saying. So I insist on word for word translation. And that means taking time, and time means money. So I think if I could speak to anyone who is out there hiring someone to go to the field, I think this is important work, clearly, I would just tell them, you can't, you know, it takes time to do a good job. You need time. You can't just do a flying visit. You can't be there for 15 minutes, for an hour on the ground. You really need to take time, and you really need to, you're not going to get just great success out of a kind of formulaic photo or a formulaic story. That said, then planning your day around the light. So the typical, if you're the visual storyteller and the writer, for example, the most effective way to do it is use the beautiful light. Like this is beautiful afternoon light. The light is coming in at an angle, and so we see it in the water. You see it in her sari. Use the light in the morning for the first couple of hours of the morning, for the last couple of hours of the day, and then the rest of the day, you have to. You're basically, somebody said, the way that they explained it was the light is just kicking your ass. It's not easy. You're doing a very different kind of photograph if you're doing it at all, because it's hard to manage this harsh light and the harsh light that's coming from overhead, and you get this kind of eye sockets, and it just doesn't look nice. So that's a great time to do interviews. It's a great time to talk to people, or even move around if you need to. Take a break. So the nuts and bolts, again, this identifying your character. I think the important thing is sitting with them, explaining to them. So once you've kind of identified this girl, for example, was one in Sierra Leone. We went, and after we met her in the school, we went and talked with her family. And then we set out the expectations, explained the project, and then we, got an informed consent. They understood what we were looking to do. They understood where it was going to be used. They understood how we were going to do this. They understood everything about what we planned to do. And that was before they signed the forms. So, so then when we showed up the next day, it was not a surprise. Before, and in fact, we were there with them for a couple of days in order to be able to capture the whole of her story. So I did a UNICEF book for this. So we talked about her day. That is a great way to be able to figure out, talking to somebody in advance about their day. It's a great way to get a photo list. It's a great way also to get a little window into their lives without doing a full-on interview. It'll help you craft the questions that you can do and use in an interview, but without them, I mean, particularly if you're doing it on video or audio, you want them to be fresh. You do not want them to have already told you their story, and then you just say, oh, okay, now I'm going to record your story. Could you please say what you said yesterday? Because it will never come out the same way. It will be a shortened, abbreviated version. So talking about their day is an excellent way to kind of get that window, get those questions, but not kind of have them be done with it. Planning, but you have to be, I mean, this is a job of pivoting all the time. Following your curiosity, I think, is, for me, that would be a top tip, because it's, sometimes I have been curious about something and it has ended up to be the most amazing story and has been very, very interesting. And then how can I tell this story from a fresh perspective, I think, is a question we always need to ask. Not the tired, same old, same old. Branding. This was the big subject of this. I'm trying generally to convince clients that you don't have to hit people over the head with branding and mention your organization 400 times in the text and talk about how great you are. That less is definitely more. Ditch the jargon, ditch all the acronyms that are, I mean, development is, they are legion in development. Run your story through that so what filter that I hated but have learned to love. And then I think also ask, what data can you put in that would really expand the message that you are trying to bring to this thing. And then I don't know, anybody Do we have any questions in the chat? Nope, nothing right now. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the visual parts. Since that was the story, getting better visuals. And this comes from experience being with people in the field. Who is the subject of this story? And a lot of other photographers that I have seen and worked with or worked alongside in the field seem to, or at events or whatever else, it's the whole focus seems to always be on the officials. And for me, sometimes the story is about the official, but most of the time, I mean, well, let's put it this way. They are looking at the officials or the photographer. I mean, this was actually a man taking photographs of me. That was his job. He had been, this was in Sudan, and he was asked he was told to take photographs of me. And I could not understand why for the life of me I would be worth any sort of a story. The people who get lost in this are, in this case, it's the students, but it's the beneficiaries. That's who the story is about. That's who we're impacting. We're not, I don't care who's the chief of party and who is sitting at the table with him and who's on the dais. I mean, sure, maybe we need a few of those pictures, but so much effort goes into that. And it is the story is in the people. It's the people who we're impacting. Obviously, I feel a little bit strongly about this, so I'll move on. Photography, it's all about the light. So as we mentioned, work your day around it. And if you can, stay nearby or stay in the village, if your organization will let you do that, so that you can be there early and stay late. You will see a whole different side of life. Take us into their world. I mean, again, this is something that you could not, if you didn't stay nearby, if you weren't willing to wake up really early, you were not going to get the fact that these people in a refugee camp in Niger were, what is it like for them before they go to school? How is it? I mean, take us into their world, see the activities, see what's going on. Capture moments of genuine connection. Everybody can recognize, I think all parents can recognize this. We can all feel the same feelings that this mother feels. And so we recognize our shared humanity. What is your camera's point of view? Is a good question to ask yourself. I prefer eye level or from below. It speaks to an equality between the parties, where coming from above generally does not, but sometimes also, in order to get a shot, you have to come from above. Maybe there's too much clutter, there's a big old patch of light or something else. So in this case, I don't feel that it looks down on her too much, and it does not erase the equality, but it is important to consider that. Looking at something from below, also seeing how you can frame it. It's an angle coming from below gives people kind of I mean, we can think of it as a show of respect, I would say. How much do you need to include in the photograph? Is it, do we need to see? I struggle with this myself. I took this photo like 10 different ways. And did I need to focus on, did I need to see the whole picture? Did I need to come in? Did I need to, want to see her hand with the whip or her hand with the plow? Did I want to see her feet? What is enough to give the information and to give the feeling? I mean, I wanted the feeling of a woman plowing and this that sucking mud, and just so that you could actually perhaps feel it yourself being there. There's a couple of things in the chat. Let me see if, will the recording be available if we came in late? Yes, absolutely. Okay, Nicola, you've got that. So find an unexpected point of view. This still, sometimes I look at this photo, even though I know what it is, and I think, what is it? Oh, yeah, it's a, I was going along and thinking, how could I photograph this woman getting water? It was a contaminated stream. It was late in the afternoon. And I was thinking, well, I just suddenly looked down and I saw her reflection there with the watering cans, and I saw her shoes, and I was like, oh, wow, that looks nice. I could try that. So, I mean, it's just, you know, happy accidents, just paying attention. Using the tools of photography, in this case, shutter speed, to help you tell the story. We're thinking about doing a visual storytelling, a thing that is that is a bit more specific to photography. If people are interested, we can do another webinar about that. But the idea of using the tools of photography to help you to tell the story. So in this case, we see that they're circling around her because of the motion blur, which our eyes, of course, don't see, but the camera can. And then this idea of repetitive action is so much your friend, because it's, you know, I've probably got 50 shots of this at least, because it's like you're just shooting and waiting for the one right shot where the girl is smiling, where the kids are running, but they're not running in front of her. So it's it's just, you know, it's a numbers game, really. This is the same sort of thing, capturing the action. And again, you know, probably 50 shots of this, but you're watching and things are happening and you're moving around with him, and one works out. So you take a lot. Another tip, just make time to hang out. You never know what's going to happen. And that's where people are, you know, you see people being just people. Especially if you can hang out in the afternoon and the light is good, all kinds of things look good. So just a few more, there's not that many more slides, but so just, I was going to give you a few kind of examples here of what says an overcrowded classroom. What kind of a photo? So sometimes at this point, I'm just going to take you through my thinking. I did not know how long. I was waiting for somebody to come at any minute to just kind of grab me and say, we're going. So I walked into that classroom, and the first thing I did was just take this photo. I was like, okay, let's just see, you know, if nothing else, and we have to go, then I have something. Because there were probably 200 kids in this classroom. And so, but I didn't like this photo, but I just thought, okay, at least I've got something. So then I started, nobody's coming. So I was like, okay, let me move around. Let me see what I can take. And you'll see that, you know, there's a lot of crappy photos. I mean, there's a lot of crappy photos, no matter what you do. So no matter who you are, it's just getting past the crap. Let it, you know, get it all out of your system and then find the better something. So here we had, you know, it was like, okay, would it look better if I showed how little space the teacher has? You know, would that be a good photo? And I was like, nah, that's crap. And then I thought, well, okay, what about all the kids who are sitting on the floor and they're spilling out of the classroom? No, that does not give a sense of anything. Then I thought, well, what about the kid who's sitting outside the classroom? And, you know, these kids are spilling out of the classroom. I'll take that kid. Nah, it does not communicate what I was looking to communicate. So I kept moving around the class and then tried multiple versions of this, where I felt like this was the one I finally chose, because what it did in what I felt about it was that it shows the crowding, but it also makes it human, and it also gives you a feeling, and it connects you and shows you that these are kids, and these are, this is what they're used to. This is where they live. This is, for several hours of each day. And how do they think about it? And yet still we see that clearly it's a problem, but it's not, there's no poor me. And there is a connection that is lacking in something like this. In something like this, there's just a bunch of, there's just numbers, basically. And here we have people. There's a question in the chat. Let me see. Okay. Yeah. All right. So people are coming back. That's fine. People just about the recording. Make a photo that tells the story. And you may have to wait for the elements to come together. This was a classroom in Kenya, and we wanted something that, I wanted to see the two classrooms with the partition in between. The idea these teachers were talking about the noise, they were talking about these new textbooks that they had got, they were taking, it was various pieces that we wanted to communicate, and it was just kind of waiting for the stars to align, basically, and all the elements to come together. And sometimes you can also suggest. I mean, that is the point of the next slide, which is basically, what do you do when nothing's happening? You show up and things are not working out. The stars are not aligning. A lot of people call it staging, and yeah. I mean, it's something that, were we in a strict photojournalistic setting? Absolutely not. However, in this case, for example, this man he was leaving just as we arrived, and he was like, okay, I've cut my grass for the day. I'm taking it to my animals. I'm done. And we said, well, do you think, we just arrived, we just need a picture of you taking the grass. Do you think you could cut a little bit more grass? And he said, oh, all right. So, I mean, it's what he was doing. It's a real thing. It's exactly, I didn't ask him to do anything that he doesn't normally do. And I said, so how would you normally do it? How, go out there, please, let's just do it, and I'll take your photo. So the first one of these photos, he's turned the opposite way. So his face is in the shade. It didn't look good. The light is very boring. Unfortunately, it was light was pretty high in the sky by this point. So what I did was also just ask him, could you just turn a little bit so that we don't just have a totally dark face, so we can see your face. So, it is a tricky line, but I would say, and a blurry line, but I would say that this is not exactly photojournalism. It's not exactly corporate photography, and it's not exactly marketing photography, but there's some element of all of those things. And it's my key point is to make sure that it's what's true. You're doing what's right, what's true. And then the last one, sometimes you just have no choice. This kid this was in Darfur in South Sudan, and he had an amazing story about his having been, it was the government forces coming in, and his family having to flee. It was but we were not really able to capture any of that. He could not speak freely where we were, and we could not do anything except what the government officials allowed us to do. And that was simply take one photo of him sitting in a classroom. So that was it. So that is it. And this is my website. And I hope, pretty much everything I've showed you, some element of it at least is there on my website. And I hope that you guys can go and check it out. So, and that's it for me.